This video is brought to you by Ground News. The events of October the 7th and Israel's reaction to them have restarted the Israel-Palestine debate across the world, from Dagestan to college campuses in the US. A wide range of opinion has emerged, with Western countries generally being more pro-Israel and what we might call the global south being less so. So in this video we thought we'd zoom out and take a look at where the world stands on Israel, with the most and least pro-Israel countries. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a quick disclaimer. Obviously, labelling countries as pro or anti-Israel is a simplification that ignores both intranational differences and historical context. But unfortunately, we just don't have enough time to do this in a TLDR video. Similarly, we don't have time to look at every UN country's position on the issue. So instead, we're going to focus on those countries that are conspicuously pro-Israel and those that are conspicuously anti-Israel. Most of the countries we don't mention in this video, though, basically have two priorities. They want international law to be upheld, and they want regional escalation to be avoided, which is why the majority of UN members voted for a humanitarian truce at last month's General Assembly vote. Nonetheless, if you think we've completely oversimplified somewhere, or have missed a country that deserved mention, leave a comment down below. Anyway, disclaimers aside, let's start with the countries that are the most pro-Israel. The most obvious case here is the US, which has been Israel's closest ally since probably the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Despite the fact that both Biden and Obama have criticised Netanyahu in the past, since the 7th of October attacks, Biden has been steadfast in his support, stepping up military aid and supporting Israel at the UN by voting against a humanitarian truce and vetoing a potential Security Council resolution calling for humanitarian pauses. Before we get into Israel's other Western allies, though, a quick look at some of its non-Western ones. Guatemala and Paraguay, for instance, were two of just a handful of countries to vote with Israel against a humanitarian truce at the UN. Israel's relations with both countries developed in the 60s and 70s, when all three countries were sort of international pariah states. Israel sold arms to the Guatemalan government during the Guatemalan Civil War, and after the 1967 war, Israel struck a deal with the Alfredo Stroessner regime in Paraguay to illegally relocate tens of thousands of Palestinians from Gaza to Paraguay. Both countries have also recently elected pro-Israel leaders. In May, Paraguay elected Santiago Pena as president, who's since moved the Paraguayan embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And in August, Guatemala elected anti-corruption crusader Bernardo Arvelo, who studied at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, served as Paraguay's ambassador to Israel, and is the son of former President Juan José Arvelo, who was one of the first world leaders to recognize Israel as a state in 1948. Papua New Guinea, which also voted against the humanitarian truce, has good relations with Israel on religious grounds and moved their embassy to Jerusalem in September. Another non-Western country that's been conspicuously pro-Israel is India. While India didn't vote against a humanitarian truce at the UN, it abstained on the motion, and Modi has expressed unwavering support for Israel in his public comments. Deeper trade links and cooperation on counter-terrorism have been driving India and Israel closer together for some time now. But Modi's position is also probably motivated by anti-Muslim sentiment among his Hindu base. Modi and Netanyahu also have a personal affinity, and there's an ideological overlap in that the current Israeli and Indian governments are ethno-religious states with strong leaders. When it comes to the West, most Western countries are generally pro-Israel, but there's quite a range of opinion within Europe. The UK, for example, is perhaps Israel's staunchest supporter. They were the only European country to abstain rather than vote in favour of a humanitarian pause at the Security Council vote. And Rishi Sunak has pledged, quote, unqualified support for Israel and sacked one of his ministers just for calling for a ceasefire. Many Central European countries are also pretty pro-Israel, in part because they're generally pretty pro-America in their foreign policy, with Austria, Hungary, Czechia and Croatia being the only European countries to vote with Israel at the UN against a humanitarian truce. Germany is also pretty pro-Israel, in part because much of the German political class believes the Holocaust gives it a historic obligation to Israel's statehood. But France, for example, is slightly less pro-Israel, both because Macron fancies himself as a bit of a diplomat and because he's worried about domestic unrest in France, which has the largest population of both Jews and Muslims in Europe. Macron has been more focused on peace rather than Israel's right to self-defense. Macron even suggested expanding the international anti-ISIS coalition to go into Gaza instead of the IDF. And unlike both Germany and the UK, France voted against Israel at the humanitarian truce vote in the UN. Some European states have even gone further, with Spain, Luxembourg and Ireland all pushing for an outright ceasefire, not just a humanitarian pause. And the Norwegian Prime Minister essentially accused Israel of breaking international law a few days ago. Ireland has particularly poor relations with Israel, largely because Irish nationalists identified with Palestine's struggle against Israel in the late 20th century. And Ireland also accused the IDF of mistreating the thousands of Irish troops deployed to the UN South Lebanon peacekeeping force in the 80s. Ireland was the first EU country to call for a two-state solution, and has almost single-handedly blocked the EU from designating Hezbollah's political wing as a terrorist group. So you get the idea. While the West is generally pretty pro-Israel, there's clearly a wide range of opinion within at least Europe, which is one of the reasons the EU has struggled to come up with a coherent or decisive response to the crisis. Anyway, on to the second part of this video, the countries that are the most anti-Israel. Again, starting with the obvious one, we've got Iran and its proxies in Lebanon, Iraq and Yemen, who don't like Israel for both religious and geopolitical reasons. Interestingly, while it's hard to believe now, Iran and Israel actually had pretty good relations for most of post-war history, based on a mutual antipathy towards Soviet influence and Arab nationalism. The Taliban are also unsurprisingly pretty anti-Israel for quite similar reasons to Iran, as is Syria, or at least the Assad regime. This is in part because Assad is a close ally of Iran, but also because Israel continues to occupy the Golan Heights, which it captured from Syria during the 1967 war between Israel and an Egypt-led coalition of Arab states. But before we get on to the other Arab states, let's take a quick look at some non-Arab countries. Left-wing governments in Chile and Colombia have withdrawn their ambassadors from Israel in the past few days, with Bolivia severing all diplomatic ties. Another interesting case is Turkey. While Israel-Turkey relations have been on the up for the past few years, Erdogan has completely turned on Israel since last month's attacks. He's accused Israel of losing its mind, committing crimes against humanity, and acting like a crime syndicate, all while calling Hamas warriors protecting their land and citizens. Now, this is partly because Erdogan's electoral base is overwhelmingly pro-Palestine, as demonstrated by the massive rallies in Istanbul last month. But it's also because, ever since the Arab Spring, Erdogan has been trying to position himself as the de facto leader of the Muslim world. Anyway, finally, let's talk about the other Arab states. Now, you might assume that the Arab states would be vehemently anti-Israel, as they were in the 20th century. But while some, like Syria and Qatar, have been forthright in their criticism, in most Arab countries there's a divide between the public and the elite. In general, Arab publics are staunchly anti-Israel, both because of their memories of the Arab-Israeli wars and because of their cultural affinity to Palestinians. But Arab elites have actually been moving closer to Israel recently, for at least three reasons. First, after years of instability in the Middle East, their priority is stability, even if that means peace with Israel. Second, there's a massive economic potential. Israel needs oil, and the Arab states need Israeli tech and services to transition from commodity exporters to developed economies. Third, many Arab states now see the Palestinian cause as an Iranian cause, and they worry that supporting Palestine could end up indirectly benefiting Iran. Anyway, this is why, over the past few years, 4 Arab states, the UAE, Sudan, Bahrain and Morocco, have all normalised ties with Israel, and Saudi Arabia was due to follow suit before last month's events. This is why most Arab states have only so far issued strongly worded statements, but if the war continues to escalate and other groups like the Houthis and Hezbollah get involved, the political pressure for a stronger Arab response will grow. Keeping track of this will require following a number of different news stories from a wide range of outlets. This is all possible thanks to our sponsor, Ground News, a website and app designed to help you take the power of the media into your own hands. Here's how it works. Every day, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from all over the world. They then organise these articles by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lean on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. For example, here's a story relevant to today's video topic. WHO concerned by reports of evacuation warning to Gaza hospital. Right away, you can see that the story had 44 outlets reporting on it. 48% lean left, while another 39% lean right. But my favourite part has to be their new comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in left-leaning and right-leaning reporting. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. Our team at TLDR likes Ground News so much that we've decided to offer 30% off the Ground News Vantage plan to all our viewers. That's under $6 a month for unlimited access to every incredible Ground News feature. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.